The Titans cannot pass on Cam Ward with the first overall pick. That is the thesis for today's podcast. Justin Melo may have some may have some pushback on that theory. Travis Wingfield, our guest, is going to tell us why that is true. This is the Music City Audible. Let's get to it.
How about Cam Ward and that arm talent?
There's just no quit in Cam Ward.
That is how Cam Ward does it.
From a 0-star to a 5-star.
The improbability of Cam Ward.
Oh, welcome everyone to another episode of the Music City Audible podcast. Justin, we finally made it to what I'm calling the Cam Ward episode. No disrespect to our guest, Travis Wingfield. Maybe this should be called the Travis Wingfield episode, but this is the one. We've been teasing it for weeks. We are finally going to dive into Cam Ward. We're going to present the thesis that the Titans cannot pass on him with the number one pick. And at the end of Travis's guest spot, he's going to tell us exactly why they cannot do so. We're diving deep into Cam Ward as a prospect, his strengths, his concerns, and his weaknesses. And I thought this was an excellent conversation with Travis. I'm so excited to reveal this to our listeners. Justin, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm going to flat out say that, Travis has been on here before. If you guys aren't familiar with him, he hosts a podcast for the Miami Dolphins. He is actually an employee of the Miami Dolphins. And, I was a little hesitant. Travis is the best, but didn't really know that he was going to come here, to be honest, with that level of nuance about Cam Ward that he has. This was probably the most in-depth, nuanced conversation we've ever had on a prospect ever. I think I'm just going to flat out say, outside of like breaking down tape with Liam Cohen and stuff, and some of the other coaches we've had on here, Travis really did blow me away with this guest appearance. I mean, the guy puts in the work. Before he was with the Dolphins, as he'll note here in a couple of minutes, he is a expert charter of quarterback play. He ran a website that kind of charted prospects and really did this at a really high level. So this is really, really outstanding stuff from Travis on Cam Ward.
Absolutely. And I am so excited, like I said, to bring this to our audience. But before we do, Justin, we got to tie up some loose ends here. We got to cover a couple little things, and then we'll get to the Cam Ward talk. The Senior Bowl just happened last week. And a lot of cool stuff came out from that. We had Zach Lyons sit down with Mike Borgonzi. Great interview for F Words Pod. If you missed it, go check that out. There were people down there for the Titans. The A to Z people were down there talking to Callahan and Borgonzi and Titans brass during Senior Bowl practices. Got a lot of great sound and nuggets from that. And I'm going to use one of those little nugs for today's I'll Drink to That, brought to you by Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville. Justin, what did you want to use this platform to talk about?
Yeah, funny enough, it's going to go against this episode, and I'm okay with that because, this was very much a you-driven episode, in my opinion. But Mike Borgonzi talked about when they were, the Titans beat writers down there, talked about building the trenches, a priority, the offensive line, defensive line. You look at this draft, the Senior Bowl, as you said, just passed. The offensive line class was phenomenal out there. There wasn't a better prospect probably than Gray Zabel, North Dakota State offensive lineman, playing guard, playing center. A lot of the tackles looked really good too. Ariante Ursary, Anthony Belton, who could be a target for the Titans top of the second round to play right tackle. Just a ton of guys. Jackson Slater, a guy that I'm going to be pounding the table for as we go on as my small school crush of the year from Sacramento State, playing a lot of center down there. I think he's got a future role there. But Mike Borgonzi talking about building this offensive line. I think this is the right draft to do it. Todd McShay, former ESPN analyst, now of The Ringer, recently on his podcast discussed a really interesting point about these teams that were playing on championship weekend, obviously in the Super Bowl, the Eagles, certainly. The Chiefs fit this too. Teams that were kind of patient with the quarterback, had a bridge guy in there, certainly with Kansas City. Mike Borgonzi was a great example of that, talking about how they had Alex Smith. With Philadelphia, they were, kind of patient after the Carson Wentz misfire and bringing in Jalen Hurts as a second rounder. What did those teams do while they were patient? They built up the trenches. They kind of focused on having great offensive lines, great defensive lines. Philadelphia Eagles, Kansas City Chiefs, it's no secret, probably the two best offensive lines in football. If anyone rivals that, it's the Detroit Lions. Okay, but again, perennial winner, perennial contender in recent years. So kind of marrying with what Mike Borgonzi said of how he wants to build this team through the trenches. That Todd McShay podcast I thought was a really interesting point. Looking at the teams at the Super Bowl and how they've built their teams really struck me as interesting. I'm kind of tying all that together. That's my all drink to that because despite this episode, I remain hesitant about going quarterback at 1. I think this offensive line, I think the pass rush obviously needs a lot of help. I'm agreeing with Mike Borgonzi on this all drink to that, and I'm building up this roster.
I think there are ways to do that where you still draft Cam Ward at number 1. And the number 1 way is you use the rest of your picks on offensive linemen. Not all of them, obviously, but it's certainly at the top of the second round, or trade back a few spots in the top of the second round to pick up an extra third or an extra fourth, so you have another, stab there to try to get one of these guys. I think is the way to do it because the Titans have been building up their offensive line. You have, what I would consider cornerstone players right now in J.C. Latham, Peter Skoronski, and Lloyd Cushenberry. From left tackle to center, you're solidified there. Right guard, you could find a replacement level player at right guard and have a serviceable offensive line. Obviously, right tackle, they need a massive improvement. They need a huge upgrade at right tackle. There's probably not going to be a ton of options there in free agency. You probably are going to have to take a rookie there. And whether or not you start with sort of a bridge stopgap, and then sometime during the season, you insert that rookie into the right tackle spot. I mean, you're not taking a right tackle number 1 overall. Obviously, no one would argue for that, especially in this draft class. This isn't the draft class where you have those top of the board tackles, those top 5 pick, even probably tackles. So that's not where the Titans are going to go in with the first pick. But I think starting with that second round pick and on throughout the draft, they will try to find guys like this. So I agree with you to some extent, but I think you can do that while still drafting Cam Ward number 1 overall. I'll drink to that. Brought to you by Sinkers Beverages, the premier wine, spirits, and beer store in East Nashville, serving the community since 1985. Their knowledgeable staff is proud to help you with large parties, themed events, or finding something unique for a special occasion. From birthday parties to milestone celebrations to everyday moments, Sinkers can help with the right drink for every occasion. And if you head to the sinkersbeverages.com website or check the link in this podcast description, you can join the in-crowd. In-crowd members get access to allocated wines and spirits, exclusive events, early access to barrel releases, and more. So speaking of drafting Cam Ward with the number 1 overall pick, and the title of this episode, the Titans must draft Cam Ward with the number 1 overall pick, I think we should talk about why. We should get into why without further ado, right? Or is it time?
Let's bring on Travis.
All right. We've been teasing this for a while now. We are super excited to bring Travis Wingfield back onto the show. You can find him on Twitter at Wingfield NFL. Travis does a podcast for the Miami Dolphins. He's on the pregame show. He writes covering the team, all things Miami Dolphins. And I am just going to say, Travis, being down there in Miami, you must have seen a lot of Cam Ward stuff. That's what we're here to talk about today. Cam Ward, what he could bring to any team at the next level, but specifically for Titans fans, what he might bring to the Titans at the next level. Kind of want to go through some of the reasons that you are so high on him as a prospect, some of the reasons that other people might not be as high, and how you respond to those maybe criticisms. And then we're just sort of going to have an open dialogue here about Cam Ward. So why don't you start by telling us what makes him such an exciting prospect in your eyes?
Yeah, so off the jump, Justin and Justin here, like you probably are wondering if you listen to this podcast, why is the Dolphins official podcast we're talking about Cam Ward? Like that makes no sense. But I went to Washington State University, go Cougs. I watched every single rep of Cam Ward's. I used to, before I got to the Dolphins, run a quarterback website where I scouted quarterback. So it's kind of my thing. So that's where my qualifications come in off the top. As far as Cam Ward's game, I talked about him in his first year with WSU as a guy that I thought could be a riser throughout the course of his career because of how he processed and saw the football field, which is my number 1 trait at quarterback. I think all the physical stuff that guys can do, we've seen what Lamar Jackson does year over year, what Jaden Daniels just did for the Commanders, how he turned that entire program around. And people will point to like the legs and the running, but what makes those quarterbacks baselines to get to that stuff is the way they see the field and how they process it and how they attack the game from a student standpoint to really put themselves in position to excel with anticipation and quick game and intermediate game, because all that stuff is the bulk of what you do as a quarterback, and the extra highlight reel stuff is kind of like the sizzle on top of the steak. You have to have that basis in place to be able to play quarterback at a high level in this league. And, I argue with fans all the time about the quality of our quarterback here in Tua Tagovailoa. And to me, that's what his best trait is. And he's one of the best in the league at that. And that's how he survives without the elite plus physical traits that you see across the league. So for Cam, that's where it starts to me. The way he sees the field, the way he can parse out coverage and knows the way his concepts attack that coverage. But then you add in a flavor of playmaking to that on top of all of it. And that's, to me, me, the combination you have with all the top quarterbacks in the league, they can put the ball wherever they have to at any given time on any throw against any coverage. They can escape and make plays with their legs. And this guy is probably the best creator, outside of structure, I would say, going back a handful of years. And you might say that's crazy because of Caleb Williams and what he did at USC. But I thought Caleb's escapability kind of showed you in his rookie year where there was some downside to that. It was more like Zach Wilson to me, where he kind of would retreat opposed to trying to find pockets to navigate. And Cam is just so well aware of where that pressure is coming from, where his angles and the blocking up front is, and how he can navigate those tight spaces and still, perform from the pocket while creating amidst the chaos. And that is such an important trait to have in the league, even if you can't run for big yards. Like, again, I go back to Tua, like his ability to operate in small spaces is how he has the mobility to survive at this level. And Cam has that and then some. So I think that the combination of the critical elements, the non-negotiables at the quarterback position, are the first thing that I noticed. And then you factor in all that electric, playmaking and the way he can just kind of cruise around the field as a runner. The Florida game this year was so funny to watch, how just in control and in command of that entire operation he was in a building that folks thought he couldn't play in. Like, he's cool, he's calm, collected, he's professional, he's poised. I am so in love with this prospect. I think it's a slam dunk first overall pick. I've been saying it for a couple of years. I brought it up to scouts in the building a couple of years ago. Like, what do you guys think about Cam Ward? And they're like, well, he's got a way to go. But like, I always saw the vision with this guy, and it was so fun to watch him ball out here with a program that could, to play at his level. Because at WSU, it was Cam Ward and everybody else. So I just think that he has the polish, the experience, the reps to be a guy that can start right away and be a long-term hit for any franchise.
Travis, that was a phenomenal answer. I've been kind of letting our audience know over these last couple of episodes that this was very much going to be a Graver-centric episode, because Graver's a big Cam Ward guy. I'm still on the fence a little bit, and you kind of teased it, but in the fairness, and to be completely honest, I want our audience to know something. You had mentioned you went to Washington State, right? So I'm gonna put a box there. You're currently in the Miami area. I'm going to put a box there. And what Travis doesn't know, I'm letting him know now, I actually snuck into his house the other night. And first of all, he's got a great living space, many leather-bound books, apartment. It smells of rich mahogany. And I actually plucked that hair out of that luscious head of hair that he's got. And I'm getting it tested right now to see if there's a familial relationship with the Cam Ward, because that's where I would draw the line on this episode and say, enough's enough. We've brought on a Coug alum, we've brought on a Miami area guy, and we've brought in a family member. No, all kidding aside, I think one thing that stuck out to me, Travis, when I was going over your analysis of him, is you put out a piece that he grades favorably more than any quarterback in the last 5 years, I believe you said, except for C.J. Stroud. And you self-criticized. You said, well, we didn't have Jaden Daniels higher. Maybe no one gets it right all the time. And quarterbacks, I think more often than not, we see that at the top. But what really curious to me is you said that list goes in order, that you had Stroud, you had Cam Ward, then you had Trevor Lawrence, and then Jaden Daniels, Penix, Fields, Drake May. What blows me away about that in full transparency, obviously the Trevor Lawrence to me, having Ward ahead of him, and it might look great now, but as we all recall, Trevor touted as this generational prospect. Talk to me about that aspect of it, why you were lower on Lawrence, I would say, than most people, almost everyone probably was, and why you've got Ward ahead of him.
Yeah, because he was that guy, right? He was supposed to be the next Andrew Luck that everyone talked about as a can't-miss prospect. And I think there was a lesson there for me and over the last couple of years, and I think Jags fans probably would agree with this, that Trevor Lawrence, man, and I say this with I mean the knock, but also like don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Like he kind of reminds me of Ryan Tannehill in some ways. And I'm talking about like Dolphins Tannehill in the sense that like everything that he sees, it kind of feels like robotic and how he processes. And I think I probably should have been more against that when he was coming out of Clemson, because I go back to Trevor Lawrence. Like I'll never forget the first time I watched him. It was him and T. Higgins in their spring game as freshmen. And they couldn't be stopped by what was a Brent Venables defense that was the best in the country at the time. And I was like, this guy can run for 60 yards. This guy can throw the football anywhere he wants. And I was probably a little bit less in tune to the X's and O's of the game to understand how well he processed. I don't think I had as much of a higher like curve on that particular criteria. Whereas, I've been in the league for 5 years now. I rub elbows with coaches and people that do this for a living and learn more about what actually, transpires for a quarterback compared to just the pro day throws that, Zach Wilson got drafted second overall because of a pro day, when if you watch his BYU tape, he did the same things he did for the Jets. Like, it was always pretty obvious to me. And so Lawrence was in that same class where I was kind of starting to maybe shift a little bit of my quarterback projection, because another guy that I love was Josh Allen. And I was the first one to say, like, this guy is he's a scatter shot, like Ricky Vaughn style thrower who can't place the ball anywhere at any given time. And he like remade his whole throwing mechanics and process. But for Lawrence, I think you see it in the way as a pro now. And I think it was apparent on his tape in college, but I didn't emphasize it enough, that when there was, pressure, when he had to get off of his spot and move to a new spot in the pocket, where I just love how Cam can do that so almost effortlessly. Like, he literally has eyes in the back of his head. I don't think Trevor had that same feel. And that's where that knock came from. And it's honestly just more of a way I feel about my brother. I think we're calling him now Cam Ward, with how he played. I'm so impressed by everything that he does from the position. We'll probably get into the knocks here in a second, but I think that when you scout quarterbacks, when you watch the negative plays, you have to log them, obviously, but I think that you shouldn't necessarily say that's what it is and what it's going to be. Like, there's certain things you can coach out of guys, and you take the flashes and the high upside, and you emphasize that more and say, how do we get more of that and reduce the bad? Which for Cam, it's like, to me, he has the easiest, bad habit to take away, which is all the stupid throws that he makes when he gets, when he breaks 4 tackles. Like, oh, I can make this even better. Like, no, just eat the ball and live to fight another day on 2nd and 10, because you're probably going to get a first down there anyway. So to answer the question, it's just more of a really a tip of the cap to Cam Ward. I just think he's so special, man.
And we're definitely going to get into some of these knocks and the concerns that people have, because I can hear a segment of Titans fans watching or listening to this right now rolling their eyes at how high of a praise that we're giving out for Cam Ward here. But I'm going to keep going for a second before we get to those knocks, because I think you touched on it a little bit in your first answer earlier, but talking about the non-negotiables and talking about his ability in the pocket, and then talking about the extras, the ability to extend and create and improvise. The non-negotiables for me, and we recently heard Brian Callahan talk about this with our friend Easton Freeze, about the things that he places a premium on are timing, accuracy, and decision-making. And I think there's a misconception about Cam Ward's game that he can only play outside of structure, that he can only escape the pocket, break, contain, and make these big plays, and that's how he makes a living. When in reality, I think it's often underrated how well he does play in structure. And sure, there are some games, you turn on the tape, you turn on the Louisville tape, the first drive, you got, 4 or 5 consecutive misses from Cam Ward, just inaccurate, missed balls. But then he turns around and, he finishes that game with over 300 yards passing, 4 passing touchdowns, no turnovers. It's like it comes on throughout the game. And other games are different. Some games are different than others. We saw a number of games from Cam Ward this year where he came on later in the game and maybe started slow and played a part in putting his team in a big hole. But he also had Miami's defense was terrible, and they allowed way too many touchdowns and kept putting him in pressure positions. But talking about those non-negotiables, the timing, accuracy, decision-making, I think he does it at a higher level than he gets credit for, especially with the RPO concepts, which you can say that that's an easier concept maybe to execute. You're just reading one defender usually and trying to make the right read. But what he does that makes it so special, I think, is the speed that he makes those reads, the speed that he goes from a handoff position to feet set, shoulders square, and ability to deliver an accurate ball on time. Like, some of those abilities are uncanny, and I just want you to talk a little bit more about some of those non-negotiables, and then we can get into what makes him truly special, which is, I think, the pocket maneuvering and navigation, like you said, eyes in the back of his head, and that ability to extend plays. But on the non-negotiables first.
Yeah, that flick of the wrist, commentary you have there with how quick the ball jumps out of his hand, like that's a non-negotiable in today's league, right? All the zone read that teams run in RPO, you just have to be able to do that. And it's funny because you mentioned those slumps that he would go into in games. My first thought when you said that, Graver, was like, Josh Allen does that every single week. He'll have like 2 or 3 drives where it's like ugly and they go 3 and out, or maybe he throws a couple of interceptable balls, and then he's just so inevitable that you can't hold him down for 60 minutes. And I would challenge Titans fans or anybody that's watching Cam Ward to find me a tape where he struggles for 60 minutes. I think the UCLA game 2 years ago for WSU was one where he couldn't quite figure out that tough defense, and they kept running rush games and he just couldn't get comfortable the whole game. But for the most part, He never has games where he just is out of it the entire game. And a couple of things I would point to is there was a throw, and I wonder if you watched the USF game, Graver, because I'll never forget the cover 2 hole shot he threw in that game for like a 70-yard touchdown after they had just given up another touchdown, the Miami defense that is. And the minute you see that cloud corner, because like in cover 2, like, you know, you're trying to navigate this small space where the over-the-top defender is trying to get that width, and this defender is trying to sink but also play the curl flat. And the minute he sees that curl flat corner squat, the ball's out. And so like there are so many quarterbacks, and it drives me freaking nuts to watch this. And Skylar Thompson was the bane of my existence for this, because he had to see it out and then he would react. And by the time you do that in this league, it's way too late. And Cam does that where, okay, there's the information that I need for step 2 and 3, and I'm going to take that information on step 1 and process it and do it now. And we're going to get to it and anticipate it and make it happen that way. There's also a really cool story about him at WSU. He had an issue, I think it was his first year there, or maybe his second year, I forget, where he had a bunch of fumbled snaps or fumbles on his stat line. And it was because he was dropping snaps and he would pick it back up and go make a play. But the reason for that, when he was asked about it, was that he said that after the ball was snapped, that's when the defensive rotation begins. And he wanted to maximize the amount of information that he could get from the time the ball was snapped to the time he caught it to see where the defense was. So this is a guy that's like hyper aware of how the defense aligns pre-snap and the coverage they present after the snap. And to your point, I do think there are some lapses in the accuracy. I think that he can get that worked out. He'll probably go work with Tom House and Jordan Palmer and the guys that everybody in the NFL works with to get the mechanics, you know, properly calibrated. And that's why I just don't worry about, you know, maybe it's not as sharp as a Jaden Daniels as a rookie, who was, my God, he was so good. But I think that when you're projecting him out long-term, and for a team like the Titans probably has a little bit of ways to go in their build, especially in the offensive weapons, you know, category, I think that he's a guy that you can grow in that way. And by the time that he hits his peak, hopefully you guys have, you know, rounded out the receiving core and rebuilt the offensive line and gotten more explosive to go along with his game. Because to your point, Graver, like he can create run after catch because of when he is on and feeling it, the ball placement is stout, but it's just the professionalism with which he plays the position. And one more note for you guys here. I'm sorry to get lengthy on you, but you know, I heard this when I was talking about him coming to Miami across, you know, fans down here. I'm like, you guys just keep an eye on Cam Ward, because I know what this guy's all about. And they were like, he's never played in a place like the Swamp before. And I was like, buddy, like I would strongly urge anybody that had that take or still has that take to go back and watch, again, the 2 years at WSU, because in 2023, he took Washington State teams. And if you know anything about football in the Pacific Northwest, WSU is the JV, you know, sorry, Mike Duggar to say this, but we're the JV to the Washington Huskies and the Oregon Ducks. And, you know, I even had Myles Gaskin on my podcast once upon a time, and I was so fired up talking about the Apple Cup rivalry. And he was like, we don't even view you as a rival, dude. I'm like, okay, that's a shot to the heart, but you know, whatever. But Cam took those JV squads into Seattle and into Eugene and threw for 700 total yards and 7 touchdowns in those 2 games on the road, and basically had the game won before his teammates essentially let him down. You know, it wasn't to this degree, but again, to bring it back to Josh Allen, it reminded me of him at Wyoming willing these horrendous, you know, FCS level program Cowboy squads to the few wins they could muster on what was otherwise like a 2-win team. So I think he's the kind of guy that can take a franchise that needs to kind of, you know, get rebooted here like the Titans do, and like he's been in the shit. Sorry if this is a family friendly podcast, but he's been in the shit and can really, you know, elevate a team that maybe doesn't have the winning mentality and the confidence, and he can really sink his teeth into a bad situation and get better from it.
A couple more real quick, Justin, on the positives, and then I'm going to throw it to you to ask about some negatives. But I do want to talk about 2 things that, now this is a very personal opinion, that are important to quarterback play, that are based for me on watching the Titans quarterbacks over the years, specifically the recent ones. Throw Marcus Mariota, Ryan Tannehill, Will Levis in there, but guys that do not have good pocket presence. And, you know, even when Ryan Tannehill was playing at his peak, I did not think he ever really had great pocket presence. He made a handful of plays in the pocket where he was under heavy duress, but for the most part, the thing that excites me the most about Cam Ward is he is a different kind of quarterback than the Titans have had in a long time, going back probably to Steve McNair. I mean, for a guy that can really navigate pressure. And you mentioned
you didn't think Charlie Whitehurst had good pocket presence?
Well,
Sorry.
you know, he had good hair. That's a different thing. You mentioned Tua Tagovailoa's ability to operate in small spaces, and I think that to me is what's so impressive about Cam Ward's game, is because there's a few ways to look at pass protection and how a quarterback navigates it. And to me, it's always the most important thing is that you help your offensive line by creating, like you mentioned earlier, the right angles for the blocks, by moving in the pocket based on where the rush is coming from, which players are winning the rep earlier in the down than others, and sliding left and right, stepping up and through. And it feels like Cam Ward always moves the right direction. Like he just has a natural, instinctive ability to understand where the rush is coming from and slide away from it, or move up and back away from it, or just buy that time. And what I refer to this, the term I use is maximizing his protection. Now, one thing that makes it hard to evaluate is he got really, really good protection most of the time. Not every time, but most downs when he drops back, especially if he's facing a 3-man rush or a 4-man rush, it's like, okay, he's standing there all day. What can you actually learn from this? But I think you can learn things from that, because how quarterbacks use that extra time that they get is so important. And that's one thing that just stands out to me about, the biggest plus about Cam Ward is that he has that instinct to navigate the pocket, to create those correct angles, to help his offensive line, to maximize the protection and make the most of it, and then use it to create big plays down the field. Not just, occasionally he checks it down. He does make the smart play every now and then. And I think the big knock is that he doesn't make it often enough, but we'll get to that in a second. But just that ability to extend the play, help your offensive line by moving the right direction, not drifting into pressure like we've seen certain Titans quarterbacks do recently, Will Levis, and actually really help that offensive line to create that protection. So it almost looks like the offensive line is protecting better than they really are because of the way the quarterback is moving in the pocket.
It's funny what good quarterback play can do in terms of the evaluation of the entire team, right? Like everyone looks better when the quarterback plays better, to your point. And I think that the confidence that he has to hang in there, and like, again, my biggest pet peeve for quarterbacks is do not bail on clean pockets, please. Like the minute you sense pressure and you think you got to create and run around, like that's kind of the downside of this new age of NFL quarterback, or I guess, goes into the high school and college game, is they get the sense that because everyone else is doing it and there's all this athletic ability at the position, that they have to run around and create and make, again, the Zach Wilson pro day throws. But Cam loves to play within the pocket. And I think the confidence that he has in his core strength and his lower body strength to be able to withstand like flybys and arm tackles and even some straight up like sacks that are free runs that get to him. He has such good poise and balance in his base. I think that's why he's so effective at playing quarterback from the pocket as a thrower, but also as an extender, because he's not going to, again, watch him on design runs. There's not like a sprinter speed in there. That's not his game. But like, I think about like Ben Roethlisberger, who was so hard to sack and could consistently just hang in there until the last minute and take those big shots because he knew how to subtly move and could keep his base below him to where he could withstand the contact and not get knocked over the way a smaller quarterback might. And, rather than trying to get outside of the framework of the pocket and create that way, he can do it from that position because he can make those little shifty movements within the pocket, to your point, to increase the better blocking angles, but also just to mitigate the pressure that does get in, because in this league, you're going to get pressure. Like one of our team philosophies here is like every single offensive lineman is outmatched by every single defensive lineman every single week, because those guys are just better athletes. And so you better have a quarterback that can circumnavigate that in some sense. And I'd look at the way he's only 6'2", but he's so compactly built and just like a ball of muscle that he's so tough to get to the ground. And so he does have the physical stature to be able to make that happen, to play in those spaces, Justin, and be able to navigate to new spots, and just the physical or the mentality to do it in terms of like, I know that I can hang in here and maximize this play to either take the big shot or shake that tackle, because I know I have, the fourth read, my progression is going to open up at this part of my footwork. Let me just go ahead and move to this spot, and I can bypass the third read in the progression, make this guy miss, and go after the fourth read in the progression. Like everything times up. And I think he has such confidence in how he times up his footwork with that progression, where the potential vulnerabilities are from the rush, which is, that's such a big part of playing quarterback. We saw Josh Allen, who for my money is the best quarterback in the league right now, lose a game because he misidentified a pass protection on that final drive against the Chiefs. I think that he is so adept at knowing where things can, how to operate the pass protection up front. And you talk about Miami's, keeping him clean. Like he has a big part of that too, because of the way he, him and his center communicate, line calls and communication. And that's a big reason why I was happy to see him go play for Mario Cristobal, because that's something that he's so good at doing as well. So I firmly believe that it's the confidence that he plays with. It permeates throughout the rest of his game. And that's a big part of it right there, is how he plays in the pocket under chaos.
Right. And it seems like Justin had to step away for a moment. We're going to continue without him. So I'll talk about a couple other traits that I absolutely love. One thing that's been a big talking point around the Titans lately is the Brian Callahan has mentioned this. Mike Borgonzi was asked about this at the Senior Bowl last week. But one thing that they've talked about wanting to find in their next quarterback is someone whose nervous system operates at a high level under heavy pressure, under heavy stress. You've already talked about Cam Ward going into opposing territory, loud, tough to play stadiums, and showing that he is unfazed by that. But I also think part of this is the high pressure moments and the high leverage moments in a game. Fourth down, red zone, trailing in the fourth quarter. How many times have we seen Cam Ward just this past season alone lead a massive, monstrous comeback in the fourth quarter, converting fourth downs, converting a third and goal from the 18-yard line with like 10 minutes to play against Cal to bring them back from down 38-18. Just these numerous moments where he is so poised, he's so calm. This applies to him in the pocket under pressure on any given dropback. It applies to him in the biggest moments of the biggest games. He's always calm and poised. And I think that nervous system thing is something that the Titans brass especially will appreciate.
Yeah, you basically just described what scouts start with quarterbacks. Like the third medium is a spot they'll go through that cut up first, fourth quarter, fourth down, red zone, because that's where games are decided, especially this time of year. I mean, whoever executes in the critical situations wins playoff games. It's that simple. And with Cam, like, there was a piece, and I think it was like College Game Day, or someone did a piece on him not that long ago about his upbringing. And I think where that comes from, Graver, is like a lifetime of preparation to play this sport in this league. And there are so many guys that have that story, but it's still rare when you see like a 8-year-old decide, I'm going to be a quarterback in the NFL, and then they go out and they actually do it, because we all had that dream at some point. But you look at the way his upbringing was very structured. His parents are very sound that way. And he really took to that, man. He was all about football. He was all about preparation, going out, getting the extra reps. And so when you've been majoring in something your entire life, like, I talk on the podcast for my whole life. Like, I feel very comfortable doing this with you guys because I have so many reps of doing it. And I think that he's experienced that enough times to where he can put himself in that position. And there's also this chip on his shoulder that you get from, again, all the great quarterbacks. And part of that is because he came out of a high school in Texas that didn't throw the ball. And so he didn't get any offers, and he had to go to Incarnate Word and continue his career playing football there. He played well enough there to get an offer from, WSU and go play in the air raid, which is a different system completely than what the running game was he played in college or in high school, I should say, back in those Texas days. And he was able to kind of, learn a whole new game, basically, of like spread it out, five, empty everybody out in the formation. We're going to have 5 eligibles and tack spaces and defense and play on time and in rhythm. And he took that, and then he came to Miami, and that offense changed a little bit with more of a physical, ground and pound attached type of run game that he had to lean on there, with the play action game and playing out of shotgun there as well. So I think just all these reps and a lifetime of preparation from a guy who's known what he wanted to do since he was, up to our knee high in terms of his height. Like, this is what he does. And I think that it's the same thing you saw with like Jaden Daniels. I would go Bo Nix as well, because of all the college reps they had. This guy played 3 consecutive years of high level college football, and 2 years prior to that of lower level college. Like, he has so many reps that I think that plays. I think it's a big part of the new age scouting process for these quarterbacks, where it's no longer, sit out your freshman year, watch from the sideline, start your sophomore year, play like half your junior year, then opt out and go to the NFL with 15 starts. Like, these guys that have 50 starts, they're entrenched and they're able to do that. And that can help you maximize that rookie contract, which is obviously the best tool you can have in the NFL.
Yeah, I will say, building on that quickly, Travis, before I get to my next question, it is interesting that some of the guys that have had success recently, like a Bo Nix, who was very much doubted throughout his pre-draft process, instant success. Then you look at some of the guys who haven't, and there are other factors, of course, but you look at a Zach Wilson, you look at a Trey Lance, really big misses at 2 and 3 overall, guys who did not have a whole lot of reps under their belt. Something you said earlier, Travis, that really stuck out to me, and I thought Graver was going to build on it, but he's being biased, so he didn't. That kind of perked my ears, and I think a lot of Titans fans would have done the same. I put a pin in it. Talked about, coaching the mistakes out of him, the boneheaded turnover, some of those stupid throws that he thinks he could make. Well, you're dealing with a fan base here that just watched the coaching staff fail to do that with Will Levis the entire season, right? And if they had done that, quite frankly, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, right? It's the main reason that Will Levis is not their franchise quarterback. They just couldn't coach that out of him. And I know there's no exact science to this, but it's the biggest pushback Titans fans have, I think, on drafting him. And I can kind of get where it comes from because they just watched a whole year of that kind of blow up in their faces. What makes you so confident that that can be coached out of him?
Yeah, I just think the growth that he's shown in all the areas of his game to this point, because again, these guys, like, to go back to the point earlier about the finished product idea, like you're not going to get that very often in what's, kind of a crapshoot of a draft, unless you look at a guy like Will Campbell, the LSU tackle, who to me, it looks like he's pretty ready to go tomorrow if he has to play an NFL game. But at the quarterback position, like, I saw less of it as time went along, which to me shows growth and maturation. And I think Graver's point about the Miami surrounding cast, and he had to have known this because he practiced against them every single day. I think there was some more pressure on him to kind of hit more home runs and play bigger than he needs to. And again, to go back to the experience I have being around a guy here, I've seen Tua go through the exact same transformation where, early in his career, and this was probably part of having, Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki and Isaiah Ford and Matt Collins as his top receivers. You always kind of felt like he was, he felt like he was in a position where he had to go make the play or get, 14 points on this drive, which you can't do that. And I've watched him over the years kind of get that coached out of him. And I think it's the same exact mindset that I talked about with that College Game Day piece where this is all he cares about. And I think that if you care about something enough, you're going to be willing to accept criticisms and work on them and get them coached out of you. And to, I guess, even change the question a little bit, maybe my question is, do I want that coached out of him? Because there are so many splash plays that you do get from him in that sense. And as a guy that watches Josh Allen on fourth downs, or at the end of half with like 8 seconds on the clock, extend a play and bleed the entire clock. We're going to get off the field and get no points. Then he makes 2 guys miss and then throws a ball that sandwiches between 3 defenders and goes in for a touchdown. Oh no, 7 points. Okay. That's what Josh Allen does. Like, I don't know that I want to take that all the way out of his game because it is so electric and is one of the things that makes him special. So it's a little bit of give and take. I do think he will have to, reel it back in a little bit at the next level, especially because some of those balls laid across the middle, buddy, if you're getting picked off by the Florida Gators, like, what do you think the NFL teams are going to do to you? So I think it is a bit of a cause for concern. And we'll get into more of the negatives here shortly, I'm sure, but I think that's why he's not unanimously right now regarded as like a number 1 overall slam dunk draft pick, is because of that stuff. So maybe that doesn't answer your question that well. It's kind of a projection to forecast that he can do that. I just think that everything else is so good. And then the pluses you get from when he does do that, to me, it's worth living with. Like, Josh and Lamar, these are guys that miss some layups here and there. I'm willing to miss a layup when I know that I have, 70-yard touchdown potential on every single play.
I fully agree, because when you can get those explosives out of that stuff, then Josh Allen, I think was it last year? It was like near the top of the league in interceptions, right, in 2023. And it's like you live with that stuff when you offset it by creating so many explosives. I will say, the one tape that I really enjoyed watching from this past season, it's going to sound like a random one maybe, but the Virginia game, because I thought it was such a good mixed bag, right? Like, he had a terrible red zone interception. He had another interception later in the game that wasn't so great. But that play at the end, where he escapes out of the grasp and just flips it to, I think it was the tight end who's like standing in the backfield in a gotta have it situation, and that play goes all the way down to the goal line, and then he throws like the game-winning touchdown. I think that was the Virginia game. On the very next play, I think it was. I'll admit, even as a naysayer, something kind of clicked in me. Like, man, you either have that or you don't, right? And it's like, and even and that, I think it was the first touchdown pass in that game. The light bulb in my mind went off when you talked about a honey hole shot. That first touchdown pass in that game, which really kind of blew me away, if I were being honest, was the velocity on that. It was like right up the seam towards the middle back of the end zone and 2-3 defenders in the area, and he fit it in, and there was just so much velocity on it. Don't get me wrong, as a guy that's a bit more on the fence than you are, and Graver is, I've seen some things that make me go, oh, wow, if this hits, it's going to hit big,
And to the point about, going back to Tua and getting that coach out of him, because like McDaniel always points to this, the Ravens game in 2022, the Dolphins fell behind 35-14 and Tua brought us back with a 460-yard, 6-touchdown day. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool that we have that now. In that game, he threw a pick early that got deflected and picked off. And that's like, quarterback psyches are so like, not to say this in a negative way, but they're fragile. Like you have to protect them and make sure that they know, like they have confidence in you as a play caller, and the stat line has to be a certain way. And he forced a ball on a drive later in that game that was like, that was a horrible pick. Like that's a bad one to follow up the next pick. And then he just kind of honed in and went to work and took what was there against the Ravens defense and wound up scoring like 35 second half points to win that game. And to me, like we'll see what Brian Callahan becomes. Obviously, its first year wasn't a smashing success, but I think that when you have more trust with your play caller and coach for the quarterback, that stuff becomes a little bit easier to coach out of them. Whereas like, am I going to get the right call on second down? Do I trust him to put me in position on this third down to where I don't have to go make the home run play? So a lot of that is on Cam, obviously, but I think it's so important to facilitate an operation around the guy that develops that trust, not just in his teammates and the players around him, but the play caller and the coaching staff that can really, magnify what he does well and afford him that trust to not feel like he has to, make the home run or take chances on plays every single rep, because he knows that his play caller will get him in a good spot on the very next down.
Right. I want to reference a couple of things before we go. We've taken up a lot of your time, Travis. A couple of things that you guys talked about, I didn't have a chance to jump in and comment, that I want to sort of add some context to, especially when you start making comparisons from Cam Ward's mistakes to Will Levis's mistakes, because I definitely think there are some parallels with the hero ball stuff, the trying to do too much, the just throw it away and live to fight another down. But on that same token, what you said is totally true, that you might lose some of those huge plays that offset the mistakes. I also want to talk about the fact that Cam Ward led the number one offense in the country in yards per game, in points per game. He led the NCAA in passing touchdowns this season. Like, if these mistakes were that big of a deal and that frequent and that much of a hindrance to what your offense is doing, you're not leading the country in points. You're not leading the country in passing touchdowns. Will Levis threw 13 touchdowns last year and 12 interceptions in, I don't know how many NFL games, 12 games he played last year. Cam Ward threw 7 interceptions to 39 touchdowns. Like, these are not apples to apples comparisons that we're making here. And I get it, because the negative play sticks out. It's a hugely negative play, especially when it turns into a pick six, which did happen to Cam Ward. Like the Cal game, he has a horrible crossbody throw. It's not accurate. It's into a crowd. It's like he's playing Jackpot, the old backyard football game where you just throw the ball up to like 8 friends and yell a number, right? And it gets picked off in return for a touchdown. And that stuff happens, and you don't want that stuff to happen. Obviously, you'd prefer he didn't make that throw across his body like that across the field. But at the same time, it's not like this is happening every game multiple times. His interceptions that he throws are almost always like this. It's very rare that he sits back in the pocket, gets fooled by a coverage, and throws an inaccurate pass or a pass where he's not reading the defense right, and it gets picked off that way, which is why I think you're so encouraged and I'm so encouraged that this kind of stuff can improve. So like, yes, these are hugely negative plays, but they stand out. It's almost like when a receiver drops a pass. We assign so much weight to a receiver dropping a pass where they can make 15 ridiculous catches and they drop one pass and you're like, oh, come on, catch the ball, right? It's sort of like that with Cam Ward, where, yeah, he makes a couple of boneheaded plays. They stick out in your mind because they're so bad, but it's not as frequent, I think, as anyone wants to say that it is, especially someone who may not like Cam Ward as a prospect. And one other thing while we're on the subject of negatives, like, I do think there are some concerns that are more basic, some that you hear every year, like he doesn't play under center. He took a handful of snaps under center, a few goal line packages where he would like run a play action and turn his back to the defense and make some pretty nice plays out of those situations, but he hasn't played a whole lot under center. I think that's something that you have to consider, but that's sort of common for quarterbacks entering the NFL now. I will say, when it comes to like pro style systems, yes, he didn't play under center, but he, in Mario Cristobal's offense, is calling lengthy plays in the huddle. He's not reading images off a card on the sideline and having one-word play calls. Like, he's getting his guys in the huddle. He's calling a long string of words out as the play call. That's going to translate really well to the next level. And then you talk about improvement. Like you mentioned, this guy was not a passing quarterback in high school. most of the guys that are being talked about as top picks in the draft, they grew up in the Elite 11 camps. They grew up in the 7-on-7 passing camps and competitions, and they've been throwing the ball and playing quarterback and reading defenses as a passer for years and years and years before they even get to college. Cam Ward has been doing that since he got to Washington State, pretty much. And he has shown such improvement over just a short amount of time. He hasn't really played quarterback the way that we think of the position for that long. And I think that that is a huge trait that, like, you have to weigh that into consideration when you look at how much he's improved since he was at Incarnate Word, that is a trajectory that is going up. It's not plateauing. It's not stopped. And that he is only scratching the surface of what he can be as a passer. So, long rant by me. But I think when you consider all those things, the boneheaded turnovers, like I said, they stand out. But do they really, like, make him do that? If you're listening or watching this podcast and you've watched Cam Ward's tape, are you that scared that he's going to go be Will Levis and throw 13 touchdowns and 12 interceptions when he's coming off a 39 touchdown season? Will Levis never threw 39 touchdowns in college. Ever.
Like 25 in 1 year, though, so it's not a guaranteed translation. I will say, even as someone that's pushing back, his pocket maneuverability is so much better than Will Levis's. I mean, there's no that Will Levis sees ghosts in the pocket, and that was an issue that he dealt with at Kentucky. And no, Cam's ability to maneuver the pocket, it's apples to oranges, night and day better. So
last question, Travis, and we'll let you go after this. The Titans must not pass on Cam Ward because
if you don't have a competitor that can rise, what's the phrase? Man, I've just butchered it. Something about rising all tides or some ships rising, something like that. I don't know. I'm way off the base here, but I just saw him do it time and time again at a Miami program that was kind of a joke before he got there, right? They were this big brand and big product that only won 6-7 games a year and made horrible decisions and weren't that well coached, and the defense was bad. He gets there and they basically should have made the college football playoff, in my opinion, but that's a different debate for a different day. And he was the reason that happened. Like, without Cam, they would have been another 6-win team. Did the exact same thing at Washington State, and kind of put the Cougs in the map. And to your point about like the turnovers, Justin, and how they compare to other guys. Like, if you look at the top passers across the league over decades now, like, all the best guys are the ones that lead the league in picks too. And I love the point you made about how it's not like he's, hitting the top of his drop and making a bad decision and throwing a pick. Like, it's when he's trying to get too much out of a play. So I think that the ability to play from that pocket and to really attack defenses from where you can hurt them the most and play in a structure and an offense, like that's what, coaches are paid to design schemes that free up things. And if you can't play from that position, you can't do anything else. So his ability to win from structure, the fact that he's going to get the most out of his teammates and put the work in, be a first in, last out kind of guy, and dissect everything you throw at him. And then the off structure creativity, it's the perfect collection of the traits you need to excel at this level and to go big. Like, you can, take a safer prospect, and maybe that's Shadur Sanders, and he's a little bit more polished as a passer and all that stuff, and that's going to get you to a certain level. But if Cam Ward realizes the potential, if he cuts down on some of the mistakes and continues to get better at the stuff he's already good at, then you're talking about a quarterback that could possibly enter the fray of Burrow, Mahomes, Lamar, Josh, rather than trying to be in that middle class where you have to build a really good team around those guys to get to a championship. So I think that he has the best potential to be a frequent contender every single year for a championship team. And that's why I think that you should not pass on him with the first pick for a team that doesn't have a quarterback right now.
Bang, you heard it here first. The Titans cannot pass on Cam Ward. Travis, thank you so much. Again, you can find Travis on Twitter at Wingfield NFL, doing all kinds of stuff for the Miami Dolphins, written stuff, audio stuff. We really appreciate your time, Travis, and thank you so much for pushing my agenda.
Hey, no problem, guys. Thank you, and go Cougs.
All right, thanks again to Travis Wingfield. Justin, that was tremendous. I mean, for me, it was tremendous. I don't know if you, have you been swayed a little bit? Do you still have the same opinion you had coming in?
I mean, I do think there's especially something there with Incarnate World 0-star to 5-star, where a lot of people missed on Josh Allen was his want to get better, right? It was the personality. I think there's no doubt about that. So I'm incredibly intrigued. Don't get me wrong. Still on the fence a little bit with some of the shortcomings. I look at someone like Dane Brugler, who does a great job. He's extremely low on both of these quarterbacks and says they wouldn't even be a top 5 or 6 in last year's class. So I'm on the fence and, leaning more towards there are better uses of this pick. but certainly really, Travis's insight, outstanding stuff.
Outstanding stuff. And I don't think there are better uses of this pick. And I don't think that a prospect, I'm not talking about how they looked in the NFL this past season. You're going to tell me Bo Nix at Oregon was a better prospect than Cam Ward is now?
No, he wasn't.
Give me a break. Michael Penix, who had a number of pretty poor years at Indiana and then went to Washington and got good. I mean, that's
similar trajectory.
That's sort of Cam Wardish. I mean, you're going to tell me that Michael Penix, with what Cam Ward could do off script, that Michael Penix was a better prospect? I don't buy it. JJ McCarthy, 1-year starter at Michigan, was a better prospect.
I think JJ goes before Cam Ward if he was in this draft, no doubt about it. I'm not saying I agree with that, but this league was really high on JJ McCarthy. He won a national championship. I think if he's in this class, he goes. Titans probably take him number 1 if he's in this class.
Interesting. So there you go. Cam Ward must be the pick at number 1. If you disagree, let us know in the comments, because I'm sure there are plenty of you who disagree. Even after hearing everything Travis had to say, you just rolled your eyes at everything positive and agreed with everything negative and said, why aren't they talking more about the negatives? Why aren't they talking more about the inaccuracy and the charting that shows Shedeur Sanders is 25,000 times more accurate than Cam Ward? It's like, these are subjective charting measurements that you never know what is deemed accurate or inaccurate when you just look at the chart. I'm not trying to write it off, because Cam Ward definitely has misses on his tape, but I feel like when everything is working right, he can be as accurate as any quarterback in the league. And so I don't really put a whole lot of stock into those charting the season, yada nonsense. But we're going to talk more about Cam Ward. We got another episode coming out later this week where we're going to talk ideal draft scenarios for the Titans. A little bit of a quicker pod here, but a Super Bowl week episode. We're not talking about the Super Bowl at all, because the Titans are nowhere near that, but maybe they could be if they get Cam Ward. All right, that'll do it. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Again, remember to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, turn on channel alerts, and drop a comment below. Are you pro Cam Ward or anti Cam Ward? We're taking a poll, so we need you to answer if you are pro or anti Cam Ward, and we'll be back later this week. So until then, y'all stay safe out there. And Mike Borgonzi, take it away.
Tighten up.
A Broadway sports media production.